The Evans Law Group, providing a full spectrum of family law services.
Parental alienation is one of the most commonly used but misunderstood concepts by judges, courts, parents, clients, and professionals alike. Over the years of in my professional practice and dealing with custody matters, some of the most difficult and painful cases that we deal with are involving alienation or the presence of alienation. Alienation has so many different aspects to it. I can tell you what it's not. It's probably easier to tell you what it's not. Alienation is not where a kiddo's mad at another parent and doesn't want to spend time with them, or is just simply trying to avoid the other parent because of the conflict or other reasons that might exist inside of a custody matter. Alienation is not where a child refuses to spend time or refuses to talk to the other parent. Alienation runs much deeper than that. Alienation is also not where a parent is on the receiving end of a child expressing that they're mad or that they don't have a desire to be with that other parent or talk to them or not wanting to spend time with them. Sometimes a child and it's also not alienation where the child may be just expressing that they don't have feelings for the other parent. That's not alienation. So oftentimes when those things that I've just mentioned are present, what the professionals are looking for is whether or not there's a rational basis or a rational explanation for that child's behavior or demonstration on the outward bound basis of not wanting to be with that other parent. Sometimes just in the sheer course of the conflict, a child is reacting to that. They feel very defensive about the other parent. You know, a child may be of a young age developmentally where they're just rationally sort of aligned or being protective of maybe their mother, or it may be their father. And it could be one of the other spouses inside of the conflict has engaged in some bad behavior. Could have been family violence. It could have been they acted out in some bad way through alcohol or substance abuse. And the child is carrying with them that experience and they're reacting emotionally to that experience. That would be an example of what we call a rational alignment. And there's a rational basis for the child to be acting the way they do. That is not alienation. There's also one of the key ingredients of what alienation is not is even in the face where a child is not wanting to spend time or talk with or be in the presence of the other parent, yet they still have feelings for the other parent. When they're inside of therapy or counseling and they're expressing privately that they still love that other parent or affection, or there's any demonstration of affection, that's when you understand that's not alienation. You know, so I've given you some examples of what alienation is not. Alienation is where you have the presence of a full alignment by a child against the other parent in which there is a completely irrational explanation for that alignment. The child re-scripts in their mind what experiences they had historically with the other parent. For example, the child's in therapy saying, I've never had one positive experience with my dad. I have no good memories with my mom. But yet, of course, that parent can bring gigabytes of video and photos of various trips and positive experiences and memories in which they shared together. That is a classic example of an irrational alignment and where alienation is present. And alienation is, in that circumstance, where a child is very rigid about that belief about the other parent, irrationally based, but it's very rigid. And they think very concretely, it's very black and white in terms of what they believe about that other parent. There's no modality of gray where the child can believe that maybe I'm wrong or maybe I'm not seeing it correctly, and they're open to the fact that maybe they did have those good experiences with that other parent. That's when the presence of alienation is setting in. It's completely irrational, it's concrete, it's rigid, and the child is not open to any other form of belief about that other parent. Oftentimes what a parent starts to experience is what they commonly refer to in my office as brainwashing, where they hear the child and feel the child parroting the comments and thoughts patterns of the other parent. Perhaps that other parent is reading things about the litigation or saying bad things about the other parent, and that child is parroting those things while in the presence of the other parent. That's a sign that that you're on that path where alienation may occur, and it's obviously a sign to intervene and do something about it. Because once the alienation sets in, it's very, very difficult and very emotional and very difficult to reconcile. So some of the examples that I've given, when a parent starts to see their child parroting and mimicking another parent's negative comments about the other parent, and you start to see these signs happening, you need to really start thinking about how to intervene, and you should consult with both a mental health and a family law professional. Because once you get down that path where the alienation hook is kind of set in, it's very difficult to deal with. Other examples that you can see of alienating-like behaviors where a parent manipulates the schedule. Hey, your dad's going to pick you up, but then sets the dad up for failure because he doesn't show up and the child is left at soccer practice for an hour, and then mom has to come in and bail the child out or something. It could be that it's manipulation about money. Your mom promised us that she would pay for band camp or summer camp or that trip that was school or something. And then the blame starts shifting right to the other parent because they promised this, and sets the child up for constant disappointment. And that disappointment is constantly directed at the other parent for them failing to follow through on a promise that in effect was never really made. And so if you as a parent are experiencing these kinds of things, it's really important to immediately try to recognize those things and come and consult with both a family law professional who is very experienced in alienation, who can likely refer you to, or in combination a mental health professional. One of the common mistakes that a parent makes is they begin the fight privately with the other parent, and they actually feed into the bait, if you will, of the alienating parent. And then things begin to escalate. And what the parent who's on the alienating end of things fails to take into account is how difficult it is, especially for a younger child, say 12 and under, 11, 10 and under, is that they don't even recognize how to process what they're feeling and what they're going through. Oftentimes there's such a relationship with that other parent who's alienating or attempting to alienate that the term is known as enmeshment, meaning they become so enmeshed with each other's feelings that the child, especially at a young age, becomes very defensive emotionally of that alienating parent. And when that happens, they feel guilty or anxious about having a relationship with the other parent. And so it all starts to compound, and it becomes very, very difficult if you don't intervene very quickly, but most importantly, correctly. Let me emphasize, one of the primary mistakes a parent can make in that situation is to escalate the fight privately. And some examples of escalating that fight with the other parent: you're on the doorstep of exchanging the child, and in front of the child, you start accusing the other parent of what is clearly obvious. I mean, we as professionals can take what is clearly obvious, but if you start doing that in front of the child, what the alienated parent doesn't realize is you're actually increasing the anxiety of the child because of that potential enmeshment with the alienating parent. So it's very counterintuitive in terms of how you approach that situation. So alienation is highly studied and highly controversial, and it narrowly missed being in the latest edition of the DSM-5. There are nationally recognized experts, Judith Wallerstein, Dr. Warshak, Leslie Drozd, who have all written the books on this, and have, for example, Wallerstein suggests that up to 15% of children in custody fights have been alienated in some way. So in this office, we like to work with nationally renowned experts in alienation to try to come up with a range of options, depending on where you find yourself and your children, in terms of how the courts will deal with that. The courts often misunderstand it in such a way that they're looking for options that are supported therapeutically, because sometimes, and even oftentimes, depending on how extreme the case is, removal of the child from the alienating parent is one of the options that has to be on the table. That is viewed in the eyes of the courts as being an extreme option, yet some of these experts that I've said, Dr. Wallerstein, Warshak, and Leslie Drozder will tell you that it's therapeutically sound in order to help therapeutically address that situation, reverse the alienation, and to help reconcile the relationship with the other parent. There are other ranges of options, but because that's viewed as such an extreme option, it's especially important to have a family law professional who can work with these nationally renowned experts in alienation and bring that evidence to the courts to help the court feel comfortable in all of the ranges of options to help reverse that alienation. Yeah, when we suspect or we know that alienation or aligning or alienating behaviors are occurring, some of the tools that we'll use, or the courts will use, are professionals such as guardians ad litem, mental health professionals such as family counselors or individual counselors. You can also get to the level of psychologists, child psychologists, or other psychologists for individuals, adults, and parents. Forensic evaluations, both psychological and or psychiatric. Sometimes that can be combined with a medical assessment as well if there are issues there that need to be factored into the assessment. So some of the tools that we'll use as family law professionals to help address this alienating behavior, for example, would be an individual therapist for the child. One of the primary scope of treatment, if you will, in a situation like that is to help the child learn to process what's real and what's not real in terms of their experience with the other parent. If they're starting to become alienated or aligning or enmeshed with that other parent, they have to process what real memories and what real experiences they have, and they have to learn to feel and to love and to have affection for that other parent independent of the alienating parent, and that it's okay to do that. Another tool that's necessary to help address that is for the alienating parent themselves to get into individual counseling or psychotherapy, for them to be therapeutically, I'd say, held accountable so that they can learn to realize the boundaries of their own words and their own behavior and how they are contributing. Oftentimes, it would not surprise me if in the DSM-5 or 6 that part of the diagnosis is that an alienating parent doesn't often realize the extent of the damage that they're causing, that they're doing it for their own purposes, they're pursuant to their own mental health diagnosis or whatever it might be. And so part of that is intensive individual therapy or psychotherapy where they can just come to realize the damage that they're causing to their child and the relationship with another loving parent. Another tool is family therapy, where an individual family therapist works with both parents, oftentimes after a number of sessions of the child and their individual counselor, and oftentimes after both parents have had individual counseling to help learn to approach and process the situation. The key element of the family therapy inside of an alienation situation is where the child learns to feel safe in the presence of both parents. That's why it's super key when in a family therapy situation, regardless oftentimes of what is discussed, is they'll say the experience is what's important for the child, is that while the alienating parent is in the room with the alienated parent, that child has a positive experience inside that room. Oftentimes they could be short-lived, but for the parent who's in that situation, you got to take what you can get and build on those small positive experiences and realize that all the tools in the tool set, if you will, the individual therapy, the psychotherapy, the parents and family therapy, all that comes together to help reverse the alienation. And frequently in these cases, when we're dealing with alienation, the courts and the professionals will recommend that the children, as well as both sets of parents, undergo a psychological evaluation. The main purpose of that is to provide a roadmap for all of the mental health treatment and the scope of services that's required, with the goal, overarching goal, is to reverse the alienation and to reconcile and rebuild that relationship with the other parent. In extreme cases, then you need to engage the services of a professional to conduct a parental alienation evaluation. It's misunderstood, but it's not the same as the psychological evaluations. A parental alienation assessment or evaluation looks at very different things. The psychological assessment or the mental health records or the comments of the mental health professionals are only a factor, a piece of a parental alienation assessment, wherein the professional who's doing that assessment can say definitively whether or not alienation is actually present. Or is it an alignment issue, or is it an enmeshment issue? Are these issues rationally based or irrationally based? Because the scope of services, mental health response or therapy to be provided is very different depending on the outcome of that parental alienation assessment. So in extreme cases of alienation, with all of those efforts being made, there are times where you're just going to have to go to trial. And it's very important to have an advocate who has the experience in presenting these issues with the courts, working with these experts, all of them, from the individual counselors to the psychologists to the alienation evaluation experts, who knows how to channel this information to the courts so that the courts can fashion the right response to save that relationship with the child with both the alienated parent and the alienating parent. But probably most important is to allow the child in their future to have healthy, sustained relationships and attachments with others, so that this alienation effort doesn't ruin their ability to have healthy relationships for the rest of their life. In these alienation cases, the stakes are very high. Oftentimes it's where the requested relief by both parents couldn't be more opposite. The costs are very high, and the outcome of the trial can be very significant and can either derail that child's relationship forever with one or both parents, or getting it right therapeutically can save that child's relationship with one or both of those parents. But it takes a strong advocate to be able to present that evidence and to present it clearly, cogently, and in a way that the court feels comfortable from a therapeutic standpoint that what they're doing is the right thing for the child. And to make the hard call, and up to and including, if necessary, removing that child from the alienating parent, which is what we call a parentectomy. And oftentimes, as difficult and as extreme as that is, sometimes it's the right call. And we are comfortable in the right circumstances in presenting that evidence and helping courts to understand why therapeutically that's the right and the thing to do that's in the best interest of that child.
When life's path takes an unplanned turn, call the Evans Law Group for a consultation at 512-628-2550. The Evans Law Group, providing a full spectrum of family law services.